Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So more on the Rafah strike that was in the Pursuit of Truth yesterday. Of course, this is the first one I've seen, the first prominent one since the ICJ ordered Israel to stop its offensive in Rafah. And now Benjamin Netanyahu is talking about it was a tragic mistake. Seems to be a litany of these when it comes to civilian casualties being caught up. But I just think it's the way that they see the citizens there. You know, that they don't, you know, if it was like a terrorist event here, you have to be very careful, you know, when you're trying to get the terrorists and not get civilians. You know, you can't use bombs, you have to use rifles, you know, you have to be very, you know, when it's a densely populated area. But it seems when it comes to Gaza, it's like, let's drop a bomb, and then if people, there's collateral damage, there's collateral damage, there's, oh, I'm sorry, it was a tragic mistake. And well, how many of these can you be allowed to have without it being more than just a mistake, and maybe being that you're not really concerned about these kinds of mistakes occurring? So let me play this for you. There's two botched ones together, because I missed the report at the beginning. Then there's an interview with someone from UNICEF, because obviously that guy, the Israeli cabinet minister, was it Ron something, was making out that there's nothing going on, there's no famine, there's no big things, whereas UNICEF seems to counter that. I know they're part of the United Nations, but I don't know, there is some finger pointed to them from Israel, side taking, but I don't know. But this is what they're saying in balance to that, so I don't know which is the truth now.
Good evening. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said tonight that something went tragically wrong after airstrikes targeting two senior Hamas militants killed a reported 45 people and injured dozens more. The country's top military prosecutor is investigating. Well, the strike has been condemned internationally, with French President Emmanuel Macron labeling it outrageous. The airstrikes took place late last night near a United Nations warehouse outside the southern city of Rafah. Satellite images taken on Friday show thousands of tents in the area. Sky News has verified that the airstrikes and subsequent fire targeted the Kuwaiti peace camp around 200 meters north of the UN facility. A warning that this report from our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle and filmed by our team in Gaza contains images of the aftermath of the strikes and body bags.
This was the absolute chaos moments after the Israeli airstrikes hit the outskirts of Rafah last night. The injured are bundled into blankets and rushed to the ambulances as the fire continues to rip through the camp. The lifeless body of one man is dragged out. He is severely burned all over from the hip. Firefighters wrestle the hoses and struggle to contain the fire. People had come here because they thought it would be safe. Last night, it was hell on earth. There are no operational hospitals in Rafah now, and so the bodies have been collected at a small clinic. 2 words written on one bag: woman, child. Some of the bodies are burned beyond recognition. These men are mourning their sister. She was pregnant when she was killed last night. Abu Mohammed finds his daughter and writes her name Aya on the white body bag. Aya was 14 years old. She was decapitated in the explosion. What remains is wrapped in the blue shopping bag.
Oh my God.
Her father can barely bring himself to look. That's her, there, he says, torn into pieces. Aya's body is put into the back of a car to be taken for burial. Her brothers escort their sibling, the sister, they were unable to keep safe. The airstrike hit a camp full of displaced Palestinians. If people didn't lose their lives, then they lost everything else.
It is known that this is a displaced camp. All of these were martyrs. To be honest, it's a scene that cannot be comprehended.
Israel says it targeted and killed 2 senior Hamas commanders, but admits the strikes caused the fire.
In Rafah, we have already evacuated about 1 million non-involved residents. And despite our best efforts not to harm the non-involved, unfortunately a technical failure happened last night. We're investigating the case. We will present the conclusions because this is our policy.
The French President Emmanuel Macron has described the Israeli strike as outrageous. The Italian government has said the attacks are no longer justified. And the European Union hinted at sanctions if Israel continues. Benjamin Netanyahu is running out of allies. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Well, joining us now is UNICEF spokesperson James Elder. Mr. Elder, thank you so much for joining us here on Sky News. Now, you're speaking to us from Geneva. You obviously have people on the ground. What is the sense that you're getting from them, both of the events and also the aftermath now, the many, many people that are injured? How are they being treated?
Yeah, look, it's one of, right now, Barbara, utter exhaustion and dismay. I mean, in the sense that they're appalled and people are heartbroken. No one anymore, Barbara, is surprised. Unfortunately, this kind of level of indiscriminate attack has gone on for months and months. That's why we have this incredulous number of 14,000 children who have now been killed. Where these overnight, where they will go, those children who survive with horrendous wounds, they will go to barely functioning hospitals that are deeply lacking in things like light, to operate on, anaesthetics, and burns require the most remarkable in terms of whether it's ointments or anaesthetics. These are not there. I've seen that in hospitals. And my colleagues also just still speak to the ferocity of attacks. I think it was only a few days ago that the International Court of Justice ordered that the attacks continue, and since then there's been dozens, maybe around 50 or 60 attacks, air attacks just in Rafah. So that's the daily reality for families and civilians there, in areas that were designated safe. Now, Barbara, we know, I mean, UNICEF has said from November, there is no such thing as a safe zone. A safe zone, firstly, must have food, water, medicines. They don't have those things. Secondly, of course, by law and by ethics, it mustn't be attacked. And now, overnight, we're seeing one of the most ferocious attacks. And because of the density of families, we're seeing a fire rip through a place. And now, again, I mean, quite literally, Barbara, this place is hell on earth. Somehow people have to understand, as long as this continues, it keeps getting worse. Tomorrow will be worse than today, and so on and so on. That's the reality for boys and girls and civilians in Gaza.
I'll ask you about that later in the interview. But I just want to pick you up on one thing. You called it an indiscriminate attack. I just want to put forward what the Israeli military says, that the military prosecutor is investigating. They say it was targeted airstrikes, targeting 2 senior Hamas militants. And of course, there was a subsequent fire. Now, just explain to us, because you're not there now, but obviously you just left Gaza a few weeks ago, just the proximity of the tents and the way that people are all packed together, just basically how flammable, in a quite literal sense, the whole situation is.
Yeah, it's a great question. So Rafah was a city of around 300,000 people until a couple of months ago. Then, of course, when the entirety of northern Gaza was told to evacuate, and anyone who had the means, not everyone, but hundreds of thousands of people did. So Rafah went from a few 100,000 people to around 1.4 million people. Rafah became a city of children, 600,000 children. This is twice as densely populated as New York City, Barbara, but with no high-rises. So everyone's intense. They're crammed in. They're on beaches. They're in sandy areas. There are around a 6-7 hour queue for a bathroom. It's all they've got, and it's important to remember they're not just sleeping in a tent. They're sleeping in a tent after their home has been destroyed. They're sleeping in a tent, as many children I've seen, like little Shaima, who is a double amputee. She's had her right arm and her right leg amputated. She should be in a hospital getting not just medical care, but psychological care. Those stories are not unique. They are thousands and thousands of children, or in the case of last night, many children who simply can't leave. They're not well, they are sick, they are malnourished, so their parents move a few hundred metres to what has been designated, again, a so-called safe zone, and then this happens. So they are tightly crammed together. They're already had all their coping capacities, physical and psychological, exhausted, and of course, social services are destroyed. An ambulance and a fire brigade doesn't just suddenly turn up, and then they get to a hospital, as I said, Barbara, where they are greatly, greatly lacking in anything that a child would need for the most basic burns, much less for this horrendous inferno that ripped through their homes at night time.
What does it do to the psychology of children, the idea that there is no safe zone? All parents sort of want to reassure their children, but children, the ones that survived, have seen this happen again and again. What does the lack of real, concrete safe zones mean for the psychology of the children going through this?
I think the two things that struck me most from parents and children around that we are in this uncharted territory when it comes to trauma. I don't think we've seen a time before where every single child of a place can justifiably said to now require urgent mental support. So children, those 9, 10, 12-year-olds I've spoken to, have mentioned that moment when they saw in their parents' eyes that their parents could no longer protect them. They realised their parents had lost the ability to do that. It must be a fearful thing for a child to realise. And equally, I've had parents speak to me and say, James, I've lost the ability to feed my child regularly. I've lost the ability to keep them safe in a home. I've lost the ability to send them to school. And I've lost the ability at night time. What lullaby do I sing to my child to try and drown out the bombardment? So this is the trauma that children are facing and that their parents, because an organisation like UNICEF and many, many other agencies on the ground, Barbara, we are frontline. But it's the mums and dads who are frontline, and the mums and dads are absolutely shattered by this, and children have seen that. And so now children are trying to recover, to try to manage their own trauma. There's a little boy I will never forget, Omar. Both his mother and father were killed. That's no longer a unique story. His nine-year-old twin was killed. And when I would speak to Omar in a tent in Rafah, Barbara, he would close his eyes for long periods, and I asked his auntie why. And she simply said he's so terrified of forgetting what his mother and father look like. He knows he's lost them on earth. He doesn't want to lose them in his mind. This is children who need the best medical support, are living through a war zone, and they're trying to come up with their own ways of dealing with this ongoing trauma.
James Elder, UNICEF spokesperson, speaking to us from Geneva. Mr. Elder, thank you for your time and sharing your views with us.
I mean, that's devastating hearing that, no? I mean, yeah, the interview framed things and he used some hyperbole. And they may have agendas and this, that and the other, but if the facts are, which I assume they are, that there are lots of children who may have parents who are support or are members of Hamas, but they're children and children haven't made their decision which way they're going to fight or not. They're innocent, they're protected, and yet they're going through this. Imagine even if Israel was doing these strategic things and there's no famine and there's no indiscriminate targeting or anything like that, if it was just as best as they possibly could get it. Even that, imagine living in tents, being displaced, having to go somewhere else because it's not safe where you used to live. How, from a normal, imagine you and your kids, and you take them to school, you take them home, you watch TV, play games. Now what you're doing is they can't go to school, they can't learn. How are they meant to cope with this kind of thing? How are they meant to, in the future? This is what breeds the future. What do you think these little children are going to think in the future? How do you think they're going to see the world that's been created for them by the adults that are meant to be responsible? Yeah, I know there's reasons for this, because of the October the 7th massacre. But when does it become too damaging? When does it become too much? If it was a war where it was just like the First World War, where there's one set of army and another set of army over a bit of land fighting each other, no one civilians get killed. Yeah, maybe that could be justified. Although I don't believe in killing other human beings for these kind of ideologies of land and possession and greed and power and things. But but in this case, you're bringing that war to people's homes, to innocent people. I mean, how many is too much? If it was one or two, yeah. But if it's thousands, tens of thousands of children that are psychologically impacted every single minute of their day, I mean, how would any of us like to live through that? And yet politicians on our behalf are standing up and supporting such things. Because, well, like all of us, we've been mindsetted to believe that fighting a war is somehow courageous or good, or has some kind of valour, which it doesn't. It's a disgrace, and it shows where humanity has failed.
James, thank you very much indeed.
There's another one come up. This is the next day.
Let's go to Gaza now, and the latest catastrophic loss of life in the packed city of Rafah. Today there were more attacks. Israeli tanks were seen in the centre of the city, and Israel has been giving its version of the airstrikes that killed dozens of civilians. Yesterday they called it a tragic mishap. Today they said they used the smallest munitions possible from a jet and may have struck a Hamas arms dump they didn't know was there. Here's what the Israelis had to say.
Despite our efforts to minimize civilian casualties during the strike, the fire that broke out was unexpected and unintended. This is a devastating incident which we did not expect. We're investigating what caused the fire that resulted in this tragic loss of life. The investigation is ongoing.
Joining me now is the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert. Good evening, Mr. Olmert. Thank you for being with us. And, well, many in the international community are saying enough is enough. Do you agree?
Well, quite frankly, I said it quite a while ago. I thought that we don't have to invade Rafah. I said it publicly, I think in every possible network in the world, and also in every possible network in Israel, in the papers, in the television. I thought that we have reached a point where the possible advantage of an Israeli military operation in Rafah is not worth the cost. The cost for Israeli soldiers and the cost for Palestinians, non-involved innocent civilians that might be hurt as a result of this operation. And most of all, the possible loss of the hostages. So I thought that we have reached the point where we may not reach the absolute victory that the Prime Minister was talking about, but we perhaps can still save the hostages, and this is, I think, a primary target for what we want to achieve and need to achieve.
You see, the Israeli argument, or the Benjamin Netanyahu argument, is that, you know, there are still Hamas leaders to kill and there is still a terrorist organization to finish off. But your argument is it has to stop and stop now, and the hostages need to, or they need to try to get the hostages out, the remaining hostages out.
Well, I thought that it had to stop a while ago, not just now. 2 months ago, 3 months ago, there was no really any possible purpose that was worth the cost, as I say. And I think that the Prime Minister is not just wrong, I think that he pushes it because of reasons which are not in line with what we consider to be the national interest and the security interest of the State of Israel, and particularly not the interest of saving Israelis that are held by these murderers and killers, and we may lose them. And we already lost many of them while they were held by the Hamas, so there is a likelihood that it will continue. We will not save them, and there will not be an absolute victory anyway. So we have to make up our mind that this is the time. There are probably some of the leaders of the terrorist organizations will still be alive, but their lives are much less of importance to us than the possible loss of our own citizens, which are held by them.
And what do you think what is happening is doing to the way that your country is viewed?
Well, it's not a secret. I've been saying it, I think, even to you a couple of times ago already, that the Israeli government has to be replaced as soon as possible. This is totally inappropriate leadership for the people of Israel, for the state of Israel. Prime Minister has failed completely. Before the October tragic events, and ever since the October events, the handling of the military operation was not right, and the present time strength continuing this operation does not serve any national interest that is worse for the state of Israel. We just have to stop it, and we have to try and deal with our domestic issues, which are very serious and threatening the foundations of our country, our status in the world. The international community attitude to the state of Israel is eroding on a minute basis, on a daily basis, in such a way that the damage to the basic interests of the state of Israel is growing rapidly. It has to be stopped, and we have to handle ourselves in an entirely different manner.
You say that you believe Benjamin Netanyahu should be removed or should have been removed. Why do you think it is that he hasn't been removed?
Well, it's not simple. The events, when they started in October, the entire state of Israel, everyone, I'm just like everyone, was devastated by the atrocities, by the murderous activities of the Hamas, by the killing of thousands of innocent civilians in their homes, in the living rooms, by beheading children and raping the mothers in front of them, and killing elderly people, young people, and then abducting 240 Israelis under the most terrible conditions in the tunnels underground in Gaza. So there was a natural reaction that we need to reach out for these killers and try to eradicate the military power of the Hamas in order to prevent the recurrence of this in the future. We've done a great deal. We killed more than 10,000 of the Palestinian fighters, of the Hamas fighters. We destroyed many of the tunnels, the launchers, the bunkers, the command position, the rockets. We haven't wiped them out completely, but we have to decide what comes first. And in the mind of many Israelis, the lives of the hostages of Israel, they are not prisoners of war. They are not soldiers. They were not captured during a fighting between them and the other side. They were abducted in their homes because of the failures of the Israeli government and Israeli defense system. And therefore, our obligation is first and foremost to save them. And if there will not be an absolute victory, as the Prime Minister wants it, because of his own political difficulties and the threats to his status, and the fear that as a result of the end of this military operation, probably the process of removing him from his position will become faster and more effective. Wasn't very easy within this framework of fighting, of reaching out for the Palestinians, of getting all the country into a state of war, to make all these political moves which were necessary. But more than 7 months passed already, and I think it's about time that we will try and deal with the real problems of Israel right now. And the real problem of Israel is not a threat to its existence because of what remains of Hamas, but the shaking of the basic values and foundations of what Israel was and Israel should be. And that's why we need to act now in this direction.
Ehud Olmert, we appreciate your time once again. Thank you very much for coming on. Thank you.
I mean, obviously, you would have a negative view of Benjamin Netanyahu being a former Israeli was it Prime Minister or President. So there's that possibility. But it just goes to show you that this is an Israeli man, you know, talking about the actions of Israel being wrong, also while talking about Hamas being murderers and etc. And it's fair comment for him to say that. You know, because he's Israeli and he cares about Israel. And yeah, you've got to ask in the system that we live within, I don't believe in war, but in the system we live within, how did Israel lose the moral high ground? From, you know, it's definitely from the community. So here's the next one.
On the news, the Israeli military's ground offensive into Rafah continues despite facing international scrutiny. Airstrikes in Rafah have killed at least 45 people, with a further 20 people reportedly killed by Israeli shelling. And now the US has had to suspend aid deliveries by boat after the temporary pier suffered damage. Ahmed Bayram from the Norwegian Refugee Council is with us now. Hi Ahmed, it's good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time. Talk to us about the humanitarian situation that your team is witnessing.
Thanks for having me, Kay. I mean, our team's only source of news now is smoke and sounds of explosion. We are squeezed in the far west of Rafah. As you have reported, the area has been evacuated. Everyone is heading to the west. Our teams are reporting the hyperinflation is quite worrying. I mean, we're talking about £20 per litre of fuel. We're talking about $800 per tent. Tent is now in extreme shortage in areas of displacement. Al-Mawasi, which is only 14 kilometer long, is now taking more than it can take in terms of the population. 500,000 are staying in the open, are sleeping in the open, and children are sleeping in the sand, on the sand. And so, you know, with the shortage of aid, the shortage of food, and shortage of water, the situation is simply catastrophic.
The tanks are now in central Rafah. Where do Gazans go now for safety? What are you being told?
They're heading in all directions. This is probably the first time, even by the standards of this brutal war, you know, people don't know where to go anymore, because you're either going into a place that is too overcrowded and, you know, there will not be a spot for you, or you're going into an area that could be too dangerous, as we have seen in West Rafah. So people are heading back to areas that are now lying in, you know, ruins. They're sleeping on the rubble. Anything that is, you know, far from the sounds of bombings. You know, in Rafah, for example, you know, people have been squeezed into this area, probably the equivalent of, you know, asking all of, I don't know, North London to go stay in Enfield. The situation now is not just chaotic, but also one of fear, of worry, and sheer perplexity really on the ground.
Still firing rockets into Israel, into Tel Aviv, and we're hearing that Hamas leaders still hiding amongst refugees. One of the reasons we're told by the IDF that was the latest attack in which 45 people were killed. Israel suggesting it was a secondary explosion. A challenging time for aid workers like you as well, when you're trying to help citizens, civilians, and you find yourself in a position where you're surrounded potentially by Hamas fighters on occasion?
We are in the middle of a very large civilian population in the Mawasi, and I can tell you that we are not just disconnected from our aid routes, but we are in the middle of a catastrophic situation, as I said. I mean, people have nothing to drink, have no food to eat. My team don't even know what is going on in Rafah, on the other side of Rafah. They take our news from us whenever they have a chance to get on the phone. I hope that what is happening is going to be a wake-up call to the entire world, really, for Israel's Israel's allies exerting their diplomatic pressure. The news that the pier is now broken off and has to be reinstalled is also another worry. Aid workers are working in the most difficult circumstances, and I hope that the world is watching and then trying, to alleviate in whatever ways they can. Aid workers are, doing an impossible job in the midst of the bombing, of hunger and of thirst and hyperinflation. So everyone is caught in this, and I hope that diplomatic pressure would prioritize the humanitarian cause of the people.
Okay, Ahmed, thank you very much indeed for taking the time. Thanks a lot. Rachel's here.
I don't know. And they were talking about protests after that, with 4 police officers being hurt. The title of this one is going to be called Hell on Earth because of the newsreader, and also I think it was UNICEF referred to it as Hell on Earth. I don't know who came up with that, but that'll be the title of this one, because that's what it seems like. If you were a parent, if you were actually an innocent person, just imagine it was you in this, and you're innocent, and you're not terrorist, and you don't support terrorism, and you don't mind Palestine and Israel coexisting with each other and living in peace, and you're just an ordinary person, and then you've got kids. Imagine living in this environment that there's nowhere else like this, is there? It's like playing one of these computer games, and yet it's in reality, or watching a film, a made-up film, but this is reality where you don't know where to go. You're listening to bombs, and you've got no food, and your kids are crying. Imagine that. I know, like, there's terrorism, that has to be dealt in this world that we live in, but I don't know whether this is the best way of doing it, where you're devastating whole populations, whole innocent people, and what are you doing for the future? What are you creating for the future by doing this? And at the end of it, when you have, if they do end up killing all the Hamas that's older, then, and I suspect not many of the hostages will come back because they will get caught up in all of this. What kind of victory would that be? And have you created young Hamas members much more than the ones you're going to kill? Take care, take it easy, God bless, and peace.